Hello, and here we go again. It is Friday, January 25th, if you're watching this live, and we are going to talk today about 10 portrait mistakes that hopefully you're not making, but if you are, I'm going to give you some tips on how to avoid making those mistakes. So let me get into my slides here. Okay. Give me a second. All right, so there's our topic for today. So before we get started, as usual, if you're just joining, please tell me where you're joining from. Put that in the comments in the chat area, and I'd love to know what time is it where you are. It's 2 p.m. where I am, so I would love to know where you are and what time it is when you're signing in to join us. All right. So before I get started on the actual content of the lesson today, I encourage you to turn your cell phone to silent and get rid of any other distractions. I know my cat likes to bother me when I'm working, so do that and grab a pen and paper or a pencil because you might want to take some notes. I've got a lot of really good meaty content here and you might want to jot a few things down. So do that before we get started. And if you stick around to the end, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our Portrait Fundamentals course that is now available and how you can get a free set of my Lightroom presets, which are worth $29, absolutely free, just for joining in to this lesson today. So, if you're joining in live, even if you're joining in later, I'd love to know, obviously if you're here and it's Portrait Week, you're interested in doing people photography. So tell me, why do you want to take better people photos? So obviously you're here to learn something. Why is that important to you, to take better people photos? Why do you want to take better photos in general and take your photography to the next level in all aspects? Why is that important? And if you haven't achieved it yet, obviously you're here, so you want to learn something. Why do you think you haven't achieved that just yet? Are you missing a piece of information? Do you need more time? Do you need more practice? Do you feel like you need another piece of gear? What is it for you that you feel is keeping you from achieving your goals or that success that you're looking for, especially around people or portrait photography? Awesome, we've got Linton joining us from Australia, 7:30. Wow, you got up early. That's awesome to join us. Hopefully you're an early bird and that's not waking you up. Okay, so let me see if you resonate with any of these statements, okay? You want to be able to take nice portraits that you're proud of. Maybe you've read some books or ebooks, you've watched some tutorials, and so far nothing has really worked to help you. And you wish that you could just, quote, get it and get over struggling with all the technical stuff. I hear that so often in my classes. When am I going to get all this stuff? Can you relate to any of those things? Tell me in the chat. Because if you can, you're not alone. So what you will learn today by tuning into this lesson are 10 common portrait mistakes that a lot of beginners make, and not so beginners, right? But before we go through that, I'd like to just give you a little bit of my background. If you've never seen me before, or you're just joining Digital Photo Mentor for the first time, my background is I have had 30 years of experience as a professional photographer in many aspects. There's a photo of myself and my co-instructor Bruce Clark in an actual studio, which I had a portrait wedding studio for many years. Right? As such, I've probably photographed over 250 weddings, and if I had to put a number on it, I picked a number of about 500 portraits or so. There's probably more, but I've done at least that many. So I feel pretty qualified to teach people photography because I've done it quite a lot. And most of my experience was back in the film days, which makes things even harder if you used to shoot film. I've also had a lot of experience doing things like food photography, commercial product photography, editorial work for magazines, and I've even sold some of my images, including the one on the screen, as fine art in galleries and art shows. Right? But my passion, my absolute passion, is people photography. I love photographing people, and faces fascinate me. I find that when I'm traveling, like this portrait of this fellow in India, the places that I go to, for me, the things that are most memorable and the things that I want to capture is the people and the faces. For me, that is the essence of a place. Okay? In 2011, about 8 years ago, I started teaching because I wanted to share my experience and my skills with others just like yourself. Okay? So I've learned a lot over those 8 years teaching, and I know what people struggle with. I know what beginners like you struggle with, or intermediate photographers struggle with. Before you even ask me those questions, I probably already know the questions that you're going to ask. Right? So again, see if you resonate with any of these things. Again, a lot of things common to students in my classes and people that have taken my workshops. Lack of confidence doing people photography. I would say of all the genres of photography, it's the thing that scares people the most, and you relate to that. How about a confusion around some of the complex technical things? Things like mastering the exposure triangle, choosing the shooting mode, setting your focus mode, all of the camera settings and bells and whistles. And then flash. Flash is a whole other world of things like lighting ratios and the inverse square law. So there's a lot of complex technical things, and it can get really overwhelming, right? Do you sometimes feel like this photography learning curve is a little bit too steep for you to climb, right? So something that I've actually experienced in my teaching is I've developed ways that I teach to explain things in ways that are absolutely simplified so that anybody can understand them, hopefully in terms of layman's terms that you can understand if you just picked up a camera yesterday. Okay? So I teach in a step-by-step way. I noticed that a lot of my students were starting to achieve success and reaching their goals, and that just made me proud, and it made me want to teach even more and help more and more people. People like Dawn, she was one of my early students when I first started teaching, and she started photography well after her kids had grown up, and she had that fear of photographing people. She wanted to sit in the back of the classroom and stick to herself. And even her own words, if you read the interview that I did with her on the website, I wouldn't let her do that. So I made her engage and get involved. And now she actually has a part-time successful photography career, and she does paid jobs, portraits, and she's even done a wedding or two. Beyond that, she's become confident and she's got the skills to pull it off. Right? Rick is another one of my early students, and he had been doing photography for about 10 years. He was coming up on retirement, and in his situation, he wanted to make sure that he had something to do after he retired, so he wasn't just sitting there twiddling his thumbs, right? But he wanted to take his photography that he had been doing to the next level. So he'd come to a few of my classes, and in learning through my classes and practicing, he's now been able to leave his day job, so he retired somewhat early, you might say, and now he's unretired into a photography career, and he actually has quite a few paying clients, and he's absolutely loving what he does. Right? So he had no intention of doing this as a career, it just sort of happened for him. So whatever your goals are, whether you want to take better photos of your family and friends, or your kids, or your grandkids, imagine the feeling of achieving all of your goals. So I'm hoping to get you a step further today and then let you know how you can go the next step beyond that. Okay, so let's get into the 10 portrait mistakes. Get your pencils ready. Okay, so mistake number 1, using the wrong lens. Okay, so you're going to hear me say the words right or wrong a lot, and by right or wrong, I'm actually talking about, is it the most appropriate tool or the most appropriate lens in this case for the job and the effect that you want to achieve with that image, with that portrait. Okay, so take a look at this wide angle image of this fellow with his mule. So he's a fellow who does tours in New Orleans, or he was, and for me, the wide-angle lens adds an element of humor. You know, the mule is coming over to kiss him. They had this funny interchange moment, and I was able to capture it. Being up really close with the wide-angle lens, it adds a bit of distortion. And for me, the added distortion adds that humorous aspect that kind of plays into the story. So for me, tell me if you agree, for me, the wide-angle lens was the appropriate or the right lens in this particular case. Okay, for me it works. Now here's the same wide-angle lens photographing a young lady in a classroom setting that we use as a temporary studio. And it's the same type of wide-angle lens. I'm really close to her. So what happens with the wide-angle lens is a couple of things. First of all, you have to get really close to even get their head large enough to be considered a portrait. And you start to get this distortion because you're so close to them. Their head looks really big and elongated, and you get a lot of the background showing in the scene as well. Okay, so is this the most flattering picture of her? Tell me in the comments. I'm going to say probably not. This is not the look I would be going for if I wanted, say, a business portrait. Okay, you want to consider, like I said, the idea and the goal of the portrait. So if it's a business portrait or a Facebook profile or something that she wants to flatter her, I don't think that's doing it. So now we've changed to a longer lens, which now is less distorting on the face. You see less of the background, and I'm starting to get a lot of that sort of blurred out bokeh background that is so desired for portraits. And that's because it really helps the subject stand out on the image. So she projects, and you see more of her compared to the previous one. I'll just go back for a minute, where there's a lot of sort of stuff going on in the background, right? Now she is clearly the subject, and it's more appropriate for her because it's flattering her facial features. She's not being distorted like the wide-angle lens. Okay, so just to go back to that right or wrong lens question again, make sure you know what you want to achieve. If it's a portrait of somebody that's got a really interesting shop in a place where you've traveled to, and you want to capture the whole thing, by all means, make sure you use a wide-angle lens, but just know what that's going to do. So have a really good understanding of your lenses and how they work, and achieve the look that you want. Sorry, I thought I was going to sneeze. Okay, mistake number 2. The background is too busy and it takes away or distracts from the subject. Okay, so like I said about the girl in the classroom, there was a lot of background showing and it was quite busy. Here's another example where the background is very, what I would call, distracting and busy. There's a lot going on. You see some bright areas, some trees, some bright colors. Those are all things that will take your attention if they are in the picture, in the background. Okay, the things that you want to avoid in the background are exactly what's in this image. Bright areas, areas of high contrast, areas of bright color, specifically warm colors like yellow, orange, and red, okay, and also sharpness. So if your background is in full focus, it's going to take a lot of attention as well. So I've kind of got 3 of the 4 going on in this picture, and the subjects are a little bit lost because your eye is drawn to that bright area, okay. One trick that I will tell my students is if you look at your picture upside down, your eye will naturally go to the area where it wants to go to gravitate without sort of knowing what the subject is. So if your eye goes somewhere other than the person, you need to make a correction. Okay. So here is an adjusted version of the same couple. Okay, so now what I've done is I've used a longer lens again, so there's less background showing, and I've simplified it. So they're in the shade, which is great, and we'll talk about lighting in a few minutes. They're in the shade, which is great, but now the background is also shaded. So the background and them are on a similar light scale, light tone, and they are jumping out from the background a lot more. Okay, so the real idea here is to simplify. Okay, simplify the background, simplify your image so that the subject is clearly the subject and they stand out more in the picture. Okay? Of course, that goes without saying that you want to avoid things like poles growing out of people's heads, trees, garbage cans in the background, trash on the ground. So you can do things like just move your camera position, or if it's a case of a garbage can, maybe you could move it. If there's trash on the ground, do your civil duty as well and pick it up and put it in the trash can, and make sure that you don't have those things in your background at all. Mistake number 3, shooting from the wrong camera angle. Okay, so remember I said wrong is subjective and it's about what is the most appropriate. Okay, so let's take a look at an example of what's appropriate and what's not. Okay, so the image on the left here was taken from a low camera angle. So when I'm talking about low, that's below sort of her chin level, and we're looking up at her in the left picture. So what do you notice about that image? Okay, her nose is prominent, so she's looking down at us, so she kind of looks, maybe a little bit pretentious, first of all. And second of all, we're looking up her nostrils. Now, I don't know about you, but picture looking at my nostril is not sort of my ideal of what's going to be flattering for me. Okay, so I don't want to photograph people from that angle for the most part. Okay, so the second picture on the right, you'll notice that the camera is a little bit higher. I've also used a longer lens there, so there's less of the background again. So I'm trying to give you double hits in these examples. So the camera's raised a little bit higher, and it's pretty much at her eye level. Okay, so a rule of thumb, or a general rule of thumb to start, is to put your camera at eye level to the subject, and then adjust from there, depending on what you want to achieve with your image. Okay, so let me show you a couple more examples. Okay, so here's one where I have the couple posed on the ground. So they are quite low down, and the camera's low, but just above their eye level. So what that does is it actually forces them to look up. And that's a really flattering position for a lot of people. So you'll notice that their bodies are sort of minimized here, and any kind of chin issues that people have, like you'll notice that if I go like this, I have too many chins, and not very flattering, versus if you're looking up a little bit, you're stretching out your neck and your chin, and it's a lot more flattering for most people. So that slightly above eye level is as ideal. Okay, now you want to be careful of subjects that have a receding hairline or a big forehead, because if you come up too high, you're actually going to accentuate the forehead too much. So be really conscious of things, of features that people might be conscious of or not want to show real prominently. Something else you may have heard in terms of camera angle is get down on the children's level if you're photographing kids. And that is absolutely true. Okay, so if you're down on their level, you're going to have a much nicer portrait. You're going to feel like they're more involved in the picture. Okay, but that's not the end-all be-all, and you don't have to do that all the time. So remember I said it's about choosing how you want to have your picture look. So let's look at another example where I've done exactly the opposite. Okay, so I have a super high camera angle here. So I'm actually looking straight down on her, and she's kind of got this look of admiration. She's looking up at me. She maybe it makes her feel a little bit smaller. And if that's the look you're going for, and it kind of can be comical as well. But kids are great for humor. If you want to make humorous photos, by all means, get some kids. Okay, get some kids in a wide-angle lens. You'll have funny pictures all day long. Okay, so if you want to achieve this kind of look where you want her to seem a little bit smaller, right? And again, the head is going to be more emphasized in a shot where you're looking down, and the body is going to be de-emphasized, versus if you do the opposite, if you have a scenario where you're photographing maybe a CEO of a company and he wants to look big and tall and powerful, then you want to look up at him, but you're probably going to be doing like a full-length portrait where you're looking up and you're not seeing directly into his nostrils, but he's going to look much taller and more powerful if you have a lower camera angle looking up. Okay, so consider where you place your camera in terms of the look that you want to create. Okay, if you guys are listening, tell me in the comments in the chat, have you made any lens, background, or camera angle mistakes? Maybe camera angle is the first time you've heard that explained in that way, so maybe this is a new thing for you. Have you been making any of those mistakes? Hopefully not, but if you have been, not to worry. Let's get you on the path to not making them and go with our next one, which is number 4. Okay, so the lighting is too hard or harsh. Okay, so maybe you've heard that term hard or soft lighting before, maybe you haven't. So let me show you an example of what hard lighting looks like. Okay. Basically, hard lighting is created from a light source which is very, very small. So in this case, it's sunlight. Okay, so the sun, even though it's a giant ball of fire, thousands of miles or millions of miles across, it's very far away. So it's very small in the sky proportionately. If you're using an on-camera flash or you're even using your speed light on the hot shoe, but it's unmodified, so it's direct. Any of those things are considered small light sources. Okay. Another example would be a bare light bulb from a lamp, something like that. This is the kind of lighting that you get from a hard light source. It's very high contrast. The shadows are very hard and defined. You can actually see a line where the shadow ends. Like look at her neck. You can draw a line where the shadow is. Okay? And it's generally not something that is real flattering for portraits like this. So if I want to flatter her, again, this is not doing it because number one, she's squinting in the sun. And number two, the hard lighting accentuates every flaw, so every bump, wrinkle, blemish, you name it, in her skin. Okay? Again, I don't know about you, but I don't want those things emphasized. Okay, so let's look at the alternative. Okay, soft lighting is created by a large light source, in this case, the open sky. Okay, so it's far more flattering because it's lower contrast, it doesn't have that sharp shadow. Like look at her neck, it sort of fades off gently, and it does not reveal and enhance those skin imperfections. Okay, so for a girl like this that has beautiful skin, a young girl, I don't want to really emphasize any imperfections that she has. Okay, but how about this fellow? Okay, so this was done in an early morning, a portrait with the sun low on the horizon, but direct sun nonetheless. So he's got one of those, again, really interesting character faces with lots of wrinkles and texture and his beard and his whiskers. And the hard lighting here actually enhances that. So again, it's about appropriate. What is appropriate for the look that you want? So for this character fellow, he's a camel herder in India. I wanted lots of texture, so the hard light is appropriate. For the young girl that wants a Facebook profile, soft light is much more appropriate. Right? Something I like to say in my classes: think about how would your mom like to be photographed, okay, or your partner. Okay? Would they like to be have their flaws and imperfections highlighted, enhanced, and look like this fellow, or would they like to have them softened a little bit? Okay? My guess is if you want to stay with your partner or you want your mom to like you, you're going to go with the soft lighting. Okay, number 5. Okay, and I'll actually say if you have any questions about any of these things, do pop them into the comments now, and I'll be scrolling through and look at that at the end and answer all of your questions when we get to the end of number 10. Okay? Okay, so number 5 is the light is coming from the wrong or a bad angle. Okay, so let's take a look at what I mean by that. One of the trickiest situations that I see a lot of people get into is backlighting. So they have the subject either against a window like this scenario, or similar to the one before with the wedding couple where the background is really bright and the subject is in the shade. Your camera's going to struggle, first of all. It's going to struggle to try and get you the correct meter reading and expose for the subject correctly, and it's also almost impossible to get a correct exposure on the person and that bright background at the same time. Okay, so you probably end up with something that looks more like this, which is like a silhouette where the person is very dark and the background is exposed correctly. But it's not a photo of the window behind her, it's a photo of the girl. Okay, so we have a few options of how we can fix this. Excuse me while I take a sip of water. So number 1, you can increase the exposure. So you can do that simply by using your exposure compensation on your camera, or if you're in manual mode, you're just going to the plus side of the exposure scale. Okay, but look what's happened. Okay, so now the background is completely overexposed and blown out, and what's happening is it's so blown out and overexposed that it's actually causing flare, and it's kind of exposing into her. So the flare is sort of contaminating her, if you like to say that. So the blacks, like her hair should be almost black, and it's not. So this is the kind of situation that you get into when you're shooting into the sun outdoors and things like that. Okay, so this is not ideal either. Another way to solve this problem is to add a flash. So what I've done here is I've taken a flash, set it up off camera with a couple of remotes to make the flash fire on a light stand with an umbrella. So it's a lot of pieces of gear to set up, a lot of pieces of gear to measure and figure out how much flash and where am I going to put it in the right position, all those things to fiddle around with to get this picture. Okay? And it's nicely balanced with the window. So now I have a good exposure, and she has good light on her face, but it was a lot of work to get there, okay? So you're going to hear me say this phrase a lot: work smarter, not harder. Okay, so let me show you another example of the same model. This was taken in the classroom when I was teaching. She came to pose for us in the classroom. This was taken in the exact same room. Okay, so a couple of minutes later, all we did was moved her into the room a little bit, change the camera position, so instead of shooting into the windows, I'm shooting perpendicular or away from the windows, and I'm seeing a different background. Okay, so now the light is coming from the side, and it's producing beautiful light on her face. She has light in her eyes, which is also something you want. Those are called catch lights, and I have got no other lighting here. So there's no reflector, there's no flash, and it's much simpler. Okay, so if you can work simpler and not have to use the flash, that's the way that I prefer to go. Okay, it's good to know those things, okay, but don't make your life harder than it has to be. Another example of bad direction of light is overhead light. This happens a lot when you're shooting outdoors on an overcast day. You've got the light coming from overhead, or if you're shooting indoors where there's lights in the ceiling and you get sort of dark eye sockets. So look at the dad and the son on the right in this picture. They've got fairly dark eyes, okay? So how I solved that in this particular case was I did add a little bit of flash here, okay? And I kept it natural so that it doesn't look overly flashed and it balances with the background. But I want to make sure that I've got the light in their eyes, okay? So if I had my choices, I would choose to move to a different spot. You can also do things like work on a porch where there's an overhang and it will block that overhead light and have the light coming directly into their face, and that's a great place to work as well. Or a big tree with a branch that overhangs, you can go underneath there and it will block that overhead light, right? Mistake number 6, blurry pictures. Okay, so blurry pictures is a problem that happens from several different reasons. You might not have enough depth of field or enough of the picture in focus to have all of the subject in focus. You might have a focus on the wrong point, and I'll show you an example of that. Or you might have had a shutter speed that's too slow, and either the subject moved during the exposure or your hands shook, resulting in camera shake and an overall blurry picture. Okay? So all of those things are not desirable. Right? So let's take a look at this example. So this is one where I actually missed the focus. So it looks pretty good here, but when we zoom in, take a look at which focus, where's my focal point. Okay, so the eye that is further from the camera here, so her eye on the right side of the picture is the one that's sharper. So when you have a subject that's slightly turned, so if I turn my face, this eye, my right eye, is closer to the camera, that's the one you want to focus on. So that's where you want your focal point to be. Okay, so always the eyes. I can't stress that enough. Like the eyes are the window to the soul, and they must be sharp. If the eyes are not sharp, your whole picture is considered out of focus and blurry and unsuccessful. Okay, here's another example. Now here she's facing straight onto the camera, so both eyes are the same distance from the camera. They both should be sharp, and they are. Okay, so consider this image. If I had focused on her nose by mistake, or her ear, or it was slightly focused on her shoulder, and her eyes were not in focus and sharp, the whole thing would be considered, I would probably delete it as a failure. Okay, so you want to absolutely make sure that the eyes are sharp first and foremost. Some other things, like I mentioned, that can cause a blurry image are not enough depth of field. Okay, so if you are using a really wide aperture to get that blurry background and the autofocus, bokeh that is so desired, you really have to nail the focus. Okay, so like I missed on the one eye on the first example, you have to make sure you place your focus point really carefully if you're having a very wide open aperture. So by wide open aperture, I would be talking about like f1.8, f2.8, somewhere in that range. Okay. So if you don't have enough depth of field to cover that and you want to increase your aperture, you might want to shoot at f5.6 or f8. But if you go too far, then you risk the other problem, which is then the shutter speed becomes too slow. So as you decrease or close the aperture down, you then need more light to come in by a longer shutter speed, or you have to then increase your ISO. Okay, so if you have, let's say, aperture at f8 and your shutter speed goes down to 1/30 of a second and your hand holding, that's going to be a problem. Okay, so you always want to make sure the general rule of thumb for shutter speed, minimum shutter speed when you're hand holding, is 1 over the focal length of your lens. So as an example, if your lens is 100 millimeters, you want to make sure that you have 1 over 100th of a second is your absolute slowest shutter speed. Okay, if you have, you know that you have shaky hands or you drank too much coffee this morning, you might even want to go a little bit faster. Right? If you're using a tripod, then you can get away with a slightly slower shutter speed if you're photographing an adult and you tell them, okay, you need to sit fairly still. But if you're trying to photograph kids or toddlers especially, that is not going to work, right? So you have to sort of find this balance and do this dance between having enough depth of field to get the whole face in focus if that's what you want, or especially if you're doing a group photo, you want to make sure that the people in the second row are in focus too, because they don't want to be out of focus. And that balance between enough depth of field and the shutter speed fast enough to still have a sharp photo. Okay? It's tricky. There's a lot of moving pieces to creating portraits. Okay, number 7 is improper use of flash. Okay, so by improper use of flash, I'm talking about the flash puts out too much light, or it's overlighting the scene, or not enough flash is used. It's too harsh. So, meaning you haven't either bounced the flash or put on a flash modifier, or it's aimed or coming from the wrong direction. Okay, so let's look at some examples of that. So this first example, look at the image on the left. To me, there's 2 mistakes. Okay, so the flash is coming direct from the camera, first of all, so the lighting on them is very flat. Okay, so to create texture, you always want light coming from the side. So we want to have texture and shape in their faces, not having them flatly lit. So your on-camera flash or placing the flash on top of your hot shoe and aiming it directly at them is always going to give you flat lighting. Always, always, always. Okay, so that's mistake number 1. The second thing is that it's not well balanced with the lighting in the background in the scene, and they kind of look over-flashed. Like if you look at the picture on the left, it's very obvious to me, maybe it isn't so obvious to you, you tell me, that there's a flash been used there, okay? And they look sort of cut out, like almost like the background is fake. Versus the picture on the right, now I've corrected both of those things. The flash is now off the camera, off to camera left, and it's bouncing off of a giant reflector. So in this particular photo shoot, my husband was my assistant, and we use what's called the voice-activated light stand. Right? So if you have a partner or somebody that can go along with you, perhaps they can learn how to do the voice-activated light stand too. It's pretty simple. All you have to do is hand them the flash. They can hold it with an umbrella or a reflector or something, and if you need them to move it a little bit, you just say, hey, can you move to the left a little bit? So that's the trick to the voice-activated light stand. Right? And you don't have to buy more stuff. Right? So literally he's holding the flash, bouncing it into a big white reflector. So we're softening the light by making the light more dispersed and diffused, and it's coming from a better direction, and I've balanced it better with the background. So if I didn't tell you that the flash was used there, you probably wouldn't recognize it. That's the goal that you want to have with adding flash, especially for outdoor portraits like this. You want it to look natural. Okay. Here's another example of the flash being too strong and also coming from the camera angle again. So the light's coming straight onto him. It's kind of flat and uninteresting once again. The background, the things that are closer to the flash are being lit more than the things that are farther away. And that's what happens with flash on camera as well. If you have something that's closer to the camera than the subject, it's going to be blasted out. Okay. So here's what we did to fix that problem. Okay, this was done in my Jerome Heller workshop. I do a Jerome Heller workshop every spring. And Bob is a miner, coal miner from the 70s, and he loves posing for us. He's a great model. He's a character as well. So here, what I've done is I put a flash off camera to camera right, so it's lighting him from the side, okay? And he's got that character face again, so I want to bring out a little bit of the texture in his face. And I've also got a second flash that's coming from behind him, lighting up the side of his face and his arm. Okay? What that's done is it's really highlighted him from the background, and I've let the background go a little bit darker, so I'm not quite balancing like I did with the outdoor one. I want the background to be secondary. I still want you to see a little bit of what's there, but I want him to be the primary subject and be really well lit. Okay, so that's the difference with improper flash direction and amount. One more example, okay? Once again, camera angle, flash on camera, and there's a cue here. If you look at her arm, you can tell that the flash has come directly from the camera because there's a shadow right down the side of her elbow, a very low black little shadow. Okay, so you can look for things like that. Also, flash on camera will tend to cause red eye in some situations, okay? As soon as you get the flash off camera, you will not have that problem. So here's what we did to correct that. Okay, so now the flash is behind them and it's creating that same sort of highlight on his face and on her hair and her shoulder, which is much more dynamic, much more interesting, shows the shape of their faces, and of course, obviously the pose is a little more interactive and more interesting as well. Okay, so that's another element of portrait photography. One more example of dramatic lighting. Okay, so this is the flash used from either side to really outline him against that dark background. If I had used the flash direct from camera and flat lit from the front, he would have a shadow of himself. There would be a shadow of him on the wall, and he'd be really flatly lit. Okay, so if you're using your flash on camera or your speed light on top and pointing it directly at the subject, what you want to learn to do is to bounce it or to modify it in some way so that it's not coming direct from camera and you can create a little more dramatic lighting. Okay, tell me so far, have you learned anything? Have you picked up a couple of tips? I'd love to know if this is helping so that I can make this better next time I give this presentation. So tell me if you're learning something. 3 more to go. Mistake number 8, poor composition. Okay, so poor composition obviously has to do with all kinds of photography, and there's, better and worse composition, but I'm going to give you a couple of things to think about in particular regards to people and portraits, okay? First one is, please don't cut off body parts, especially at the joints or, cutting off fingers or toes. So the example on the left, I've cropped the image on purpose to show you what it looks like with her foot partly cut off, okay? Nobody likes to have their foot or their toes or their fingers amputated, right? So make sure that you don't cut off parts of the body, right? If you are going to come in and crop a little bit tighter, make sure that you do so either between joints, so such as, mid-arm or middle of the thigh or waist, okay? So you'll often hear the term a 3/4 portrait. That's generally sort of between the knee and the hip, or a half portrait, which would be like at the waist, okay? What about cropping into the head? Right? So some people have different thoughts on this as to whether it's okay or not. Okay, I do tend to crop into the head and I like this look. However, there is a mistake or a problem with this one, the way that I have done this one. Can anybody tell me what is the problem here? Okay, if you've ever been to a museum where they have a sculpture or a bust like a Beethoven, something like that, of an artist, what do you notice about the bust? You'll notice that there's a head, but then there's also some bits of the shoulders, right? Okay, so bits of the shoulders are required as the base, because otherwise, where are they going to put the head on the table? It's going to roll around, right? So the same thing applies here. And also, I'm literally cropping her at the worst joint of all, her neck. So she's kind of a floating head here, which is not great, right? Let's look at another example of what not to do. So this one here, in my opinion, is too much of the forehead is cropped. So now I've got lots of base, but she seems like she's got too much cut off the top. To me, it feels uncomfortable. Right? One more that doesn't feel quite right is where you have no space above the head. She's not cropped her head off, but there's no space above the head. So you kind of want to find, again, that happy medium of having a little bit of base, so a little bit of the shoulders showing. And if you're going to crop into the head, do so that it's not too far, like don't come down to the eyebrows, but don't just come to the top of the head, because that just leaves me feeling like she's cramped. This image feels tight and crowded to me. This one feels about right. So it's cropped in a little bit, and I've also put her off center, which brings me to my next point. Okay, so if you are putting your subject smack dab in the middle of the frame, learn to get your subject off center, and you're going to have infinitely more interesting photos, okay? You can also do portraits in vertical or portrait mode, right? To me, it's okay, but it's still uninteresting. Okay? A more dynamic composition for the same portrait is leaving him some space in front of where he's facing. So especially if somebody is looking in a particular direction or having their head turned that way, give them more space in front of them. I love this kind of composition, horizontal headshots with some space on the side. I love that. Okay. Just to give you a little bit of background, and Bob who's on the call right now, was here when we did this. So this is shot in India, and we were at this site of these ruins, and the fellow here came along. He was a goat herder or something, and he agreed to allow us to photograph him, which is very, very kind, because there was like 8 of us, and you could see everybody's using tripods, so they've got nice sturdy base for their camera, and our guide over there is holding a cell phone. We didn't have any lighting with us, so this is a case of, use what you can, but he's lighting from the side, so look at that beautiful light again, and that's all just coming from a cell phone, believe it or not, right? So you don't need expensive gear all the time to do this. Last thing I'm going to say about composition is it's okay to tilt the camera as well for portraits. Okay, so if you're a landscape photographer, probably you want to keep the horizon straight, and most of the time it would be weird if the horizon was tilting, especially if you're doing a waterfall shot or something like that. It looks like the waterfall is falling off the edge of the earth. But with a portrait, when you tilt the camera, it changes the shoulder position. So notice that she's got sort of a diagonal line if you draw the line through her shoulders or through her zipper, and diagonal lines are, again, infinitely more interesting and dynamic in your image for composition than are straight ones up and down. Okay? So it's okay to tilt for portraits. Mistake number 9, shooting at the wrong time of day. Okay, so there is no right or wrong, and you may not always be able to choose the time of day that you can photograph, but if you can, portrait photographers are generally photographing either an hour before sunset or an hour after sunrise. Those are sort of the golden hours, and we love to be out during that time because the sun is low on the horizon, and once it goes past the horizon, you get this beautiful soft light naturally. Okay, so take a look at this first image. This is before the sun has gone down and dipped below the horizon. It's still got that hard lighting effect. So the shadows are harsh, they're squinting a little bit, and they kind of look shiny. Like if you look at their skin, they look a little shiny. So I could add a reflector here, or I could add a flash here, but again, I'm working harder, not smarter. So what we did in this situation was we waited. Okay, 10 minutes later, literally this is 10 minutes later, they're in exactly the same spot, nothing has moved. Now the light is softer, it's still coming from the same direction, from that side, from camera right, and they're not squinting, and they're not shiny looking anymore. We didn't put any makeup or do anything on retouching on them. This is exactly what it looks like. Okay, so I'm not using a flash here, I'm not using a reflector, I'm simply choosing the best time of day to photograph and use that light to my advantage. Right? The last one, okay, choosing the wrong shooting location. So this kind of brings all of the things that we talked about together. So here we have a model that is in the shade, so we have decent, nice, soft lighting on her, but we've got all kinds of stuff going on in the background, right? So can you tell me what's going on that are mistakes here? We've got bright spots. I've got a car with a red tail light. There's a light down by the grass that's distracting. All of those things are taking away from her, okay? So I've chosen the spot to put her so she's in the shade, but we haven't thought about the background so much again. So literally she is sitting in the same spot here as she was in the image just before. So let me go back. Okay? If I move 180 degrees around her, I'm now standing here. Okay? So I'm using the building as my background instead of having the building behind me, and using that shade to let the building and her be in that same tone light again. I've simplified. The KISS principle, you can't go wrong. If you can follow the KISS principle most of the time, get less stuff in your pictures, simplify, you're on the road to better pictures. Okay, so again, finding the best location. And this is one of my favorite places to work in Edmonton, partly because this is middle of the afternoon and we still have nice light here because she's in the shade of the building, but there's a unique type of lighting situation here. There's a building across the street from us which is now behind me in this camera position, slightly to my right, that is a 6-story white building that's in full sunlight. So guess what? It's like acting like a giant reflector, putting the light on her face, coming from a beautiful direction. Okay, so if you can find lighting situations like that, and often you'll encounter them in back alleys and things, which is why wedding photographers, there's become this trend to, grunge wedding photography in alleys, partly because the light is really great there. And you're never going to deal with bright sun in an alley. If you live in New York or a city where there's lots of verticals, you can find lots of great streets like that. Okay, so let's recap. So you've learned some 10 of the most common portrait mistakes. Hopefully you've got some tips now to work on those things. Right? Some of them are going to be easier to master, like getting your exposure right, picking your camera angle. Right? Some things may be more complicated, like if you're not familiar with flash, you may need to learn a little more about it. You may need to up your knowledge, and you may need to practice more. I'm a big proponent of practice makes perfect. Okay? The best way to learn something is by doing. Okay. So I'm assuming that you attended today because you want to take better people photos, you want to have more confidence, and you want to get rid of sort of the trial and error and have a bit more consistent results. Maybe you want to have a simple solution to understand all the complex bits, the things that I mentioned like lighting ratios, inverse square law, balancing the flash, getting the flash off the camera. All of those things can be really overwhelming. Right? Perhaps you've tried to learn these things before and you're ready to try something new. Okay, so now is the time where I want to give you a special offer. Remember I mentioned earlier that if you join in to our Portrait Fundamentals class, you're going to get a special bonus. Okay, I'll come back to that in a second. So starting now, okay, I want to help you experience confidence like Dawn and Rick have. I want you to stop struggling to capture photos, especially people photography, that you're excited to share with other people. Okay, I have a step-by-step method in our course that will help you do just that. Okay, none of this stuff is magic. These are all attainable things. I know that my clients and my students have done this before, and I know that you can do this as well. Okay, you don't need a special advantage or secret tool, and you don't need any expensive resources. Okay, you can do this. So Portrait Fundamentals is now open. So if you're interested, head over to portraitfundamentals.com. Get more information there. Let me give you another example of a student who has completed the course. Okay, Victor went through the course about 3 years ago and recently got in touch with me, and I wanted to know about his experience in the course. So he told me that he struggled with being able to execute what he had visualized. So he imagined what his picture would look like, and he just couldn't get those results. Right? He told me recently that after 6 weeks, he pushed through the course. And he did it pretty rapidly. You don't have to do that, but he pushed through the course in about 6 weeks. And within 6 weeks, he did his first paid job as a portrait photographer. He said within 6 months, he felt confident and he had consistent results over and over. Right? So those are the kinds of results that I want you to be able to have as well. Inside the course, you have 25 video lessons. So these are all pre-recorded. You can watch them at any time on any device, and you can watch them as many times as you want, over and over. You have lifetime access. You get a printable PDF, so you can print it out, take it with you, or put it on your phone or your iPad and take it out into the field with you. And remember I talked about doing, okay? So the more that you can do photography and practice these things, we give you 21 practice exercises. So you watch the lesson, and then there's an exercise to do so that you can then take that thing that you just learned and go make sure that you get it. Okay? And if you go out and you practice it and you're not quite sure, watch the lesson again. You'll also get a Facebook community of your peers, of other students who are taking the course, that you can share images together and give each other feedback and encouragement to succeed. Okay? You'll also notice there's 2 of us in the photo, so you get 2 instructors for the price of 1 in this course. My partner, Bruce Clark, is a wedding photographer here in Edmonton, and he is really skilled and experienced at using flash. He uses off-camera flash. He's a master at it. So I teach the available light portion in the class, and he teaches the flash portion, and we put it all together for you so that you can understand both. Right. By the end of the course, we guarantee that you will have good exposures every time. You will be able to understand and know how to use light better, especially for people pictures. You'll be able to get consistent results with your flash. You'll be able to get portraits that you can share and get compliments on. Okay? Ideally, you want to have consistent results every time. I know how frustrating it is when you get a good shot, but you can't reproduce it. Okay, you don't know what the heck you did to make that picture. Okay, so I want you to be able to be consistently producing the results that you want and have the confidence to do so. So to outline what is in the class, lesson 1 to 4, if you've been doing photography for some time and you are an intermediate photographer, these may be a bit of a review for you, but I recommend watching all the lessons anyways. Number 1 is a review of camera basics. We will go over the exposure triangle, including ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. We're going to talk about metering, how it works, the different metering modes available on your camera and which one to choose in which scenario and which situation, and focusing modes. The cameras today honestly are so much more complicated than the film cameras that I use. They have many more settings, so we want to make sure that you understand all of these settings and when to choose which, so that you can quickly go from shooting candid photos of a toddler running through the park to seated photo of some adults in the grass, and be able to change your settings quickly and easily, and you understand why to choose each one in each scenario. Lessons 5 to 9, I'm going to talk about the properties of light. Okay, so we talked a little bit about that in the lesson today, which is the quality of light, so that's the hard versus the soft, the direction of light, making sure that you have a nice pattern of light and shadow on the subject's face, and the color of light. So that involves white balance or potentially a custom white balance. We're going to talk about the equipment that I use for natural light photography, things like reflectors, what you can buy that's inexpensive or what you can use that you might already have at home, and what you can get if you want to invest a little bit more. Okay? And we're going to talk more about camera angles and also facial angles. So facial angles would be things like the girl in this picture is looking straight at the camera versus a profile, okay? And when you might want to use each. Lessons 10 to 16 is when Bruce comes on board, and he's going to give you everything you need to know about flash. Right from the very beginning, in terms of the power of the flash, what settings to look for on your flash, how to set it up to fire off the camera, what you might need in terms of equipment to do that, and all the complicated stuff like ratios and the inverse square law, which is puzzling to a lot of people, okay? It's not an easy concept to grasp, and Bruce explains it in a way, and we have diagrams to help you understand it. Lessons 17 to 19, these are the things that our students have told us are probably the best lessons in the course, because we take you on location with a model. Okay, so you may have recognized our little classroom here that was in some of the earlier mistake photos. Okay, so I take you indoors in the classroom and I'll show you how I will photograph this model using just the natural light. And then Bruce will do the same in the same room using a flash. So you get to experience the photo shoot from 2 different perspectives using different gear and completely different outcomes. Right? In lesson 20 to 22, we do the same, but now we're outdoors. So I'm going to walk you through the natural light session, where I show you how to find the good light and what to look for. And Bruce will set up his flash and show you what he's going to do with flash, working with it in the daylight, and you might be surprised about how he's setting up and using that. Right? Finally, we take you on location to a sunset shoot where you get to see us work with the couple that you saw sitting in the grass, and we're photographing in that golden hour that I talked about. And also I'll show you how to do a special silhouette portrait, which is great for couples, and it looks really romantic. Finally, we wrap up the course with a Q&A session. We tell you what some things are that might get you in trouble and things that you want to avoid, similar to the 10 mistakes that I've given you here today, but a lot more really specific and detailed things and examples of what to do and what to avoid. Okay? So if you purchase the course, it's only available until January 31st. Okay? I'm going to put a little timer on the screen. Okay, so the timer counting down at the top is for the early bird pricing. That ends of January 28th. So if you buy it before then, you'll get the early bird pricing. You'll also get 3 bonuses. The first bonus is a PDF on more tips on composition. So we touched on that today, and I have a bunch more tips for you on composing your portraits. Bonus number 2 is more on that golden hour portrait that we talked about, using that amazing light at the beginning and the end of day. And bonus number 3 is something that I created just for this bonus for this course, which is a Lightroom presets specifically designed for portraits, including my own Glamour Skin adjustment brush. Okay, so if you want to retouch your portraits so that they have beautiful glowing skin that still looks like a real person, you're going to love the Glamour Skin brush. Okay, and finally, if you buy this course while you're watching this video until I'm finished, which is in a couple of minutes, you're also going to get a set of my full Lightroom presets, which do all kinds of things. It's 100 of them for $29 normal price. You will get them absolutely free. Okay, so all you have to do is join portraitfundamentals.com. Head over there right now and grab it. Okay, I'm hoping you're ready to achieve some portrait success, but I'm guessing you want to know what the price is. Okay? So if you were to attend a 3-day workshop with me, it would cost somewhere around $1,000 or up. If you were to hire a one-on-one tutor or mentor, you could spend over $1,000. I currently don't take that type of tutoring, but there's many that do. If you're attending an in-person class or a college session, you could pay upwards of $500 or more. Okay, so the value inside the course for me is priceless because you don't only get to attend it once, you can watch it as many times as you want. Okay. So the price of the course, if you purchase it right now, is $147. That's the early bird pricing. The regular price is $197. Or if you want a little more extra help. Okay, so the regular package includes a Facebook group with peer access and student interaction so you can work together. The VIP package is special. So this is the first time we've done this. You're going to get access to Bruce and I in a private Facebook group for VIP members only. You're going to get feedback from us on your images, and you're going to get 3 group calls where you can ask questions of us live. It'll be a little different than this, where we'll all be able to see each other, and you can ask questions verbally, and we will respond to you live time. You can also send us your images, and we'll give you feedback and tips right there in the live call. Okay, so there's a lot of information there, and there's a lot of extra value because you're getting help right from us, from the instructors. So the VIP course in the early bird pricing is $497. If you wait till later, it's $597, but there's only 30 spots available. So once we sell out of those 30, the VIP will be closed. Okay, we have secure checkout. You could pay with your PayPal or a credit card, and you'll be able to access the course right away. You can log in on your computer or any of your devices, and you'll be able to join the Facebook group or groups if you join the VIP one as well. Right? So I'm sure you have some questions about this or about the content of the webinar. If you have anything about questions about the 10 mistakes, please put them into the chat. In terms of the course, a lot of people ask me, I don't know where to start. So that's why we've done all the work for you. We've done it step by step. So all you have to do is do the lessons in order, and you're on your way. Another question we get a lot is, I don't have time to do the class right now, but do I have to register now? Well, I would recommend that you do, because the course is only available for sale until January 31st, and then the doors will be closed. And we're not sure when we're going to offer it for sale again. It might be later this year. It might be a full year. Okay, so buy the course now, and even if you don't have time to start it, this week or this month, you can start at any time and do the lessons on your own time, and you have lifetime access. Okay. Okay, if you're not sure if this is for you or not, or if it's the right level, okay, if you're an absolute beginner and you just picked up your camera, we have some FAQs on the page. We also have a chat available, so if you head over to portraitfundamentals.com, you have a question, pop it into the chat, and if we're there, we'll answer your question for you live. Okay, we're monitoring that while we're sitting here at our desk helping you. And if you're not sure, if you buy the course and you're not sure, we do have a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if it's not for you, if you decide you want a few lessons and it's either too beginner or too advanced, you can always ask us for a refund. So I hope that you've gotten a lot of value out of the 10 portrait mistakes today. And if you want to continue learning continue expanding your learning, that you'll head over and look at our Portrait Fundamentals course. I know that the students that we have over 4,500 alumni of this course, and they've gotten a lot of value and a lot of success from taking the course, and I know that you can as well. So I really want to help you do that and achieve your goals. So tell me how I can help you. Do put your questions in the chat, and I will have another Facebook Live for you on Monday with a brand new topic that's going to be a surprise. So again, I hope that you found value in the 10 tips today, and head over to Portrait Fundamentals. If you buy the course, by the time I shut this lesson off, you will also get the Lightroom presets. So I will leave you with that, and I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you again on Monday. Take care.